Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today, all brought to you by Lending Club. Go to lendingclub.com/martini. You can check your rates very quickly. You can borrow up to $40,000, and we'll tell you much more about it later in the podcast, lendingclub.com/martini. Jim, I hope everyone had a wonderful 4th of July. A little bit different to have the break smack dab in the middle of the week. Hard for some to make a 4-day or a 3-day weekend out of it. Some made a 5-day weekend out of it. So if you were able to do that, good for you. Let's dive back into our martinis, starting with the good martini. And Jim, sometimes our good martini is things that are genuinely good, and sometimes there are things that really aren't good but could indirectly be good for us, and that's the case today. We talked a lot last week about this new 28-year-old socialist woman in New York City, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She is now the darling of the left, both on MSNBC and in the blogosphere, and apparently now at the party itself. DNC Chairman Tom Perez on the radio with host Bill Press. A lot of folks will remember he used to be a cable host years ago on CNN and some other places. And here was Press's summation of the party lurching even farther to the left. And here's what Tom Perez had to say specifically about Ocasio-Cortez.
The fourth most powerful Democrat in the United States Congress, Congressman Joe Crowley, was knocked out by a young woman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, 28 years old, never ran for office before. Big progressive, calls herself a Democratic socialist, actually, like Bernie Sanders did. She was a Bernie Sanders supporter. And in Maryland, Ben Jealous, another strong progressive, wins the Democratic nomination for governor. What's this tell you about where the Democratic Party's going today?
Well, my daughters, I have 3 kids, 2 of whom are daughters. One just graduated college, one is in college, and they were both texting me about their excitement over Alexandria because she represents the future of our party.
And then he went on to say a few nice things about Joe Crowley. But, Jim, if she represents the future of the party, that means government-run health care for all. It means government-sponsored housing. It means government-mandated income, government-sponsored education, across the board. No explanation, of course, how to pay for it. If that is what the Democrats want to run on going forward, I'm happy to run against that.
Yeah, I was going to say, it is a deserving opponent of the Republican Party and the right in general to have out and out, open, avowed, yes, we support socialism, instead of the, we're nothing like the socialists. We just want government to run everything argument we've gotten from Democrats in the past. I've been thinking a lot about this. The 4th of July is good for thinking about the state of your country, what's going right, what's going wrong. And we hear this said a lot. We hear this kind of, this tossed around, the idea of, the need for civics education. The schools are failing our children. The sense that a lot of Americans don't know history. They don't know their own history. They don't know world history. I'd like to think that the average Joe doesn't need any advanced degrees, didn't need to go to a highfalutin school or anything, could look at socialism and say, this isn't going to work. Among them, the moment you say that the more the government does for you, the less you have to do for yourself, and this can develop some very unhealthy habits in a country. Certainly, taking away initiative, taking away drive, self-starting, independence, a sense that you can solve your own problems, a growing dependence upon government to take care of you from cradle to grave. What's more, I was explaining this to my younger sons not too long ago, and I said, look, under communism, everybody made the same amount of money no matter what job they did. And it didn't take long for my son to figure out, well, it doesn't matter if I do the job well or not, does it? No, it doesn't. You don't get any raises for doing a good job. You don't get any punishment. You can't get fired for doing a bad job. You just get reassigned. You take away all the incentives. You also take away a lot of the consequences. And it's this idea of having the government run everything and eliminating competition and eliminating consumer choice. And basically, yes, it is a worker's paradise. It's also a consumer's hell. Because everything is taken care of for you. You don't really get any choice. You don't really get any options. You don't get to say what you're doing, what services you want. Can't vote with your feet from one place to another if you don't like the laws in one community or in one state to another. These are big fundamental decisions we need, conversations we need to have in this country. And among them, if you talk to anybody who came over here from a communist country or a socialist country, 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, they will say it's terrible, it stinks, it was oppressive, nothing worked, and they were very eager to get here to America. They came here because, there's a reason the Cubans keep trying to risk their lives and go through shark-infested waters to get here, right? Now, if my sense is if everybody knew this, like if everybody in America had to talk to one Cuban immigrant, that all of a sudden their perspective on socialism would change pretty dramatically. Unfortunately, not every American gets that chance, and my suspicion is the more your exposure to socialism is theoretical, the more you buy into this argument of true socialism has never been tried. I mean, if every time you try this project, it ends up with refugees and work camps and secret police and all this stuff, if every time there's a fear of a knock on the door when you implement a system, maybe you should stop implementing that system. If you want to say, I want to make us like Denmark, well, we can try, we can examine to see what Denmark does well and Denmark doesn't do well. But let's observe that maybe the United States of America, this big, diverse, full of all kinds of different cultures, full of all kinds of different philosophies, maybe a one-size-fits-all solution isn't going to work in the United States, even if it does work well for certain folks in Denmark. So anyway, it's a great clarifying point. If this is where the Democrats want to plant their red flag on this hill, go right ahead, guys. We're perfectly happy to have that debate. I am a little troubled by the numbers that I see where young people saying how encouraged they are or intrigued they are, socialist curious, you might call it. But in the end, it's because they haven't really lived under socialism. I'd be perfectly happy to run foreign exchange programs, to send them to Venezuela or something like that, see how it works and see how much of a true believers they are when they come back.
Jim, in this age of resistance, I would also encourage them to pay close attention to what happens when you, quote unquote, resist in socialist countries. Yes. Maybe try to show somebody up at a restaurant. It doesn't go too well. Doesn't go too well at all. And the other thing I would say, and I mentioned this in a tweet at some point last week, now that the Democrats are openly embracing socialism, can we go back to the way the electoral map should be with the Republican-won states in blue and the Democrats in red, since they're the ones who are coddling the far, far left? That's the way it should be.
Absolutely. It's interesting because this really, I believe it started in the 2000 election. I want to say it was NBC, and I believe they had simply had the idea of, we'll use blue for incumbent and red for challenger. And because of that election map in 2000 between George W. Bush and Al Gore, Tim Russert, we probably remember him with the whiteboard talking about Florida, Florida, Florida. And there was a beginning of the discussion of red states and blue states. Red states being Republican-leaning and more on the right side of the spectrum, blue being on the left side of the spectrum and more Democrat-leaning. And a lot of people pointed out that if you go over to the United Kingdom, the official kind of signifying color of the Conservative Party is blue. The Labour Party has always been red because it's always been somewhat, the International Socialist and Labour movement has been tied to red because it was tied to the Communist Party. You can guess the color of the Greens. And to the extent then other colors get assigned to other different parties. There's always been this argument that blue was the color that should most appropriately represent the conservative movement. It was kind of a color associated with tradition. The interesting thing is that you could probably say, red, blood red, Red Dawn, we're afraid of the, better dead than red. There's all kinds of different ways you can say the red really is more associated with the left than with the right. And I think I'd be perfectly fine with flipping them. This is a trade I'd be happy to make, and I think folks on the left might actually support that kind of exchange.
So, Jim, with the left openly embracing a socialist and socialism on many different issues and saying it's the future of their party, what right-thinking conservative wouldn't want to join forces with that? I mean, come on. It's the perfect time. It's the perfect time. We talked about George Will a week or two ago saying he's hoping the Democrats win control of the House and Senate in the midterm elections. And now Max Boot, another guy who hates Trump so much he can't be happy about any policy that comes down the pike that he would have supported under any other Republican president and probably any Democratic president, is once again joining George Will and was saying that it's time for the Democrats to be back in control. He wrote an opinion piece in the Washington Post on July 4th, no less. He says, well, two-thirds of, and he's staking this mainly, or at least the last straw anyway, was Trump's handling of the families at the border. He says, well, two-thirds of Americans disapproved of this state-sanctioned child abuse, forcing the president to back down. A majority of Republicans approved. If Trump announced that he were going to spit roast immigrant kids and eat them on national TV, apologies to Jonathan Swift, most Republicans would approve of that too. The entire Republican platform can now be reduced to 3 words: whatever Trump says. He says he left the GOP the day after Trump got elected president because he said the Trump people wanted to transform the GOP into a European-style nationalist party that opposes cuts in entitlement programs, believes in deportation of undocumented immigrants, white identity politics, protectionism, and isolationism. And then he says the current GOP still has a few resemblances to the party of old. It still cuts taxes and supports conservative judges. But a vote for the GOP in November is also a vote for egregious obstruction of justice, rampant conflicts of interest, the demonization of minorities, the debasement of political discourse, the alienation of America's allies, and the end of free trade and the appeasement of dictators. That is why I join Will and other principled conservatives, both current and former Republicans, in rooting for a Democratic takeover of both houses in November. Like post-war Germany and Japan, he concludes, the Republican Party must be destroyed before it can be rebuilt. How exactly does he think the Democrats are going to rebuild anything, or even Democratic control, make America better in a way to make Republicans better? It just makes no sense.
You and I should be I would say easy sales for this type of pitch. But look, Trump has done plenty of things, both in his official duties and in his just general persona that have bugged us, irked us, frustrated us, and even outraged us. The problem is everything he lists there. I don't see any of it getting better under a president, a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate. Certainly not a Democratic Senate. In fact, if the Democrats take the Senate, this takes away the one part of the Trump administration so far that we're enjoying the most. All the good judges we're getting. And I think it's entirely possible that if the Democrats take control of the Senate, there will be no judges appointed at all until Trump's second term or until control of the U.S. Senate changes. My suspicion is they certainly wouldn't approve any Supreme Court justice. And I think you could very easily see the angry left grassroots demanding the Democrat-controlled Senate block any Trump judge at any level of the federal judiciary. I know he's complaining about isolationism. I don't like what Trump has said, but I mean, ask our allies how great things were under Democratic presidents. The irony of Trump being quasi-isolationist, by the way, I think one of the reasons this didn't hurt him so much is because there's a good chunk of the electorate, traditionally Democratic-leaning, that is actually, fairly isolationist. Faraway problems should be solved by somebody else. Why are we the ones who always have to pay in blood and treasure? Iraq was a mess. We're still in Afghanistan. In my gut, I can get all of these arguments. I also know that, when you don't do something about the Taliban, all of a sudden they end up letting this group called Al-Qaeda take up residence. And, you end up with some little things like the embassy attacks and then the USS Cole. And then all of a sudden you have 9/11. Problems that are far away don't stay far away, which is why we have to be engaged in the world and why we kind of have to be forward-leaning in our national security stance. I don't buy that the Democrats have turned into hawks. It's really kind of fun to watch them suddenly talking about Russia as if it's the Cold War again. My suspicion is that once they're back in power and once Donald Trump is in retirement, my suspicion is that the Democratic Party, by and large, will be very eager to find ways to work with Russia again. They have no stomach for this sort of long-term hostilities. They were the ones who were always trying to figure out ways to play footsie with the Soviet Union back throughout, certainly post-Vietnam. You could argue about the Democratic hawks, the Joe Liebermans, the John Kennedys, the Scoop Jacksons. But by and large, they drifted left and they drifted toward, if not appeasement, then certainly detente, mutual coexistence with the Soviet Union. And they were the ones who always thought Reagan was crazy. I don't believe that there's been this sea change of opinion amongst Democrats. I think the main reason Democrats are upset with Russia is not over Russia shooting down planes over Ukraine or poisoning dissidents over in the UK. No, what really bothers the Democrats about Russia is that they help Donald Trump. That's what makes them evil in their eyes. All the other stuff they're willing to wave their hands away at. Do I think Democrats are going to make politics more upstanding and polite and respectful? I mean, look, this is the Alan Grayson party. I don't believe that a Democratic House or Senate will make our politics any more high-minded or anything like that. I think, one of the reasons that drives some bonkers about Trump is that Trump figured out how to play the vulgar, off-color, shocking game that they had perfected so long against the, eminently polite types of Mitt Romney and John McCain and stuff like that. Do I think Democrats are going to bring around fiscal responsibility? I'm not excited about trillion-dollar deficits under Trump, but I don't think I don't think we suddenly see a new era of fiscal rectitude with the Democratic Congress. I just don't see any of the policies getting that much better with a Democratic House or a Democratic Senate. And in fact, the few parts of the Trump presidency that I find to be unalloyed victories, indisputable, this is great, this is moving the country in the right direction, would be either pulled back or halted with a Democratic Congress. So for Max Boot, look, I just don't see how we get to a better spot with the Democratic House. I don't see how that advances the movement. And it's one of those things where it's interesting. We're supposed to believe in ideas. We're supposed to believe that, the policies, the laws, these are what matter when it comes to governing. When you oppose everything Trump does, even stuff you formerly supported, Jen Rubin, you basically are demonstrating that you are in a cult of personality. You're in a reverse cult of personality, that whatever the personality you despise the most does, you will oppose it regardless of what your previous position on it was.
No, that's exactly right, and that's my litmus test. I mean, there are a lot of folks that I know who are in the Never Trump side of things in the 2016 campaign. You were one of them, and one of the things I really appreciate is that you assess him on a case-by-case basis. We have a lot of tweets that we talk about that make us cringe. We don't like his tariff policies. There are other policies that we don't care for. But when the tax cuts come through, when he appoints good judges, when he rolls back regulations, when he gets out of the Iran deal, when he gets out of the climate deal from Paris, we like those things. And the people that can't acknowledge that, like the Boots, like the Wills, like the Crystals, like the Scarboroughs, I think it damages their supposed integrity as opposed to burnishing it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where when there is a better option on the for the right, I will support that option. We don't know what the options are going to be in 2020. My suspicion is that actually you won't see any serious challenge to Trump in the Republican primary. Look, this is July 5th, 2018. A lot could change between now and then, but I think most Republicans are pretty happy with the job President Trump is doing. I think John Kasich may attempt to run for president of Ohio again. The interesting thing is whether, what argument he makes to Trump-friendly Republicans. And my suspicion is that he doesn't. I think the entire philosophy of a John Kasich presidential bid in 2020 will be step one, the entire Republican electorate suddenly realizes they made a terrible mistake and they apologize for not nominating me 4 years earlier, and they all support me. And I don't think it's going to happen. And when you don't have that step one, step two is a lot tougher. Bill Kristol made his murmuring about running against him. There's discontent in Republican circles, but the more policy wins Trump gets, the more people decide this is worth it. Now, by the way, it's very interesting. I think maybe a decisive moment, maybe right before us the next couple of days, Greg. Trump is, allegedly down to 3 nominees from his list of potential Supreme Court justices. All 3 are considered pretty darn highly by the right. Occasionally, you heard folks like Susan Collins saying, "Well, maybe Trump should pick someone off the list." Now, I don't know about you, Greg, and I realize we're going a little bit afield here, but I'm going to observe that, the argument for when Trump picked Neil Gorsuch, it strengthened 2 arguments. One, Trump is good for conservatives, that he's worth all the aggravation, he's worth all the tweets, he's worth all the controversies, because he'll give conservatives what they want in the realm of policy and law. And 2, Trump keeps his promises. And that's one thing nobody can argue. He said he had this list of 25. So far, he's one for one, and another pick is coming, apparently as soon as July 9th. Now, if he picks somebody else, maybe it'll be a really good pick. If he picks somebody else who's not on the list, could be a really good conservative, could be a really bad pick. But either way, Trump keeps his promises, would end up taking a hit from that selection. So I don't think he will do that. If he picks another one from the list and it's another conservative all-star, look, if you're a Republican, you're getting what you want from this president in large part. We'll see how the tariffs and things like that shake out for the economy and things like that. But, it's a deal that's worth it for most conservatives right now. We'll see how things shake out, but I don't think Max Boot's arguments are really going to persuade anybody. Some might even say that they're kind of, to flip-flop as extensively as you have, to go from a conservative to suddenly opposing everything Trump does. It's almost like being intellectually bankrupt, Greg.
Oh, very good. For decades, credit cards have been telling us, buy it now and pay for it later with interest. But despite your best intentions, that interest can get out of control really fast.
With Lending Club, you can consolidate your debt or pay off credit cards with one fixed monthly payment. Since 2007, Lending Club has helped millions of people regain control of their finances with affordable fixed-rate personal loans. No more trips to the bank, no more high-interest credit cards. Just go to lendingclub.com, tell them about yourself and how much you want to borrow, pick the terms that are right for you, and if you're approved, your loan is automatically deposited into your bank account in as little as a few days. Lending Club is the #1 peer-to-peer lending platform with more than $35 billion in loans issued.
So go to lendingclub.com/martini. Check your rate in minutes and borrow up to $40,000. That's lendingclub.com/martini. lendingclub.com/martini. All loans made by WebBank, member FDIC, equal housing lender. All right, Jim. Yesterday, of course, was the 4th of July, Independence Day. America's 242 years old since the signing of the Declaration of Independence in the summer of 1776. It's the one day of the year, kind of, sort of, that the two sides try to bury the hatchet. Maybe Memorial Day would be another one. It doesn't happen often. And Vox just decided, no, we're not going to do that. Dylan Matthews, writing for Vox, this July 4th, let's not mince words. American independence in 1776 was a monumental mistake. We should be mourning the fact that we left the United Kingdom, not cheering it. He then says, well, you can never know exactly what would happen if history had been different, but he says, quote, I'm reasonably confident a world in which the revolution never happened would be better than the one we live in now for three main reasons. Slavery would have been abolished earlier. American Indians would have faced rampant persecution, but not the outright ethnic cleansing Andrew Jackson and other American leaders perpetrated. And America would have a parliamentary system of government that makes policy making easier and lessens the risk of democratic collapse. He says, basically, the British abolished slavery in 1834. They even banned it in India by 1843. And, of course, that's a couple decades ahead of the United States. And he thinks we could have avoided the American Civil War that way. He says the main benefit of the revolution to colonists was that it gave more political power to America's white male minority. He also talks, of course, about the oppression of the Native Americans, the Indians, and obviously both slavery and the treatment of the Indians, you could say, are not exactly the finest moments in American history. But then he goes on to say that America would have had a better system of government if we'd stuck with Britain. He says parliamentary democracies are a lot better than presidential ones. They're significantly less likely to collapse into dictatorship because they don't lead to irresolvable conflicts between, say, the president and the legislature. They lead to much less gridlock. And then he says, and this is where I think that all of this is going, and the efficiency of parliamentary systems enables larger social welfare programs that reduce inequality and improve life for poor citizens. Government spending in parliamentary countries is about 5% of GDP higher after controlling for other factors than in presidential countries. If you believe in redistribution, that's very good news indeed. Jim, I think he's just doesn't like the founding principles in a lot of ways. It was founded upon limited government, freedom for the individual, not the government making it easier to do things to the individual. Those are the reasons, among others, that we love the American experiment, and I guess it's one of the reasons why they don't.
You run something like this on July 4th. You want the hate clicks, right? This is meant to be a stink bomb at your backyard barbecue. This is meant to say, oh, I can't believe, and so on the one hand, Greg, you and I are falling for it. On the other hand, in the interest of familiarity with history, we will, fine. Gauntlet thrown down, we will pick it up and we'll duke it out. The first thing is kind of intriguing. So he says slavery would have been abolished earlier. At least he makes the concession that, look, you never know exactly how history would have played out if one decision had been turned out differently. The first is, look, there was no doubt that the British were willing to be quite oppressive, not just in taxation, but in how they dealt with uprisings and things like that. A little thing like the Boston Massacre comes to mind. So why is he so certain that a British-ruled United States from the 1770s and 1780s on would have developed the civil rights and would have developed the general freedoms that we have? I don't think you could take that for granted. I think it's quite possible that you would have seen it would have been a tougher, more rocky road if the American Revolution had been successfully repelled and suppressed and stamped out. That George Washington and John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, all these guys were remembered as infamous traitors instead of the founding fathers that they are. He mentions that slavery would have been abolished earlier. I suppose it's possible. It's certainly likely that as the slavery was abolished in other British colonies, that the same rulings would apply to the U.S. or to the American colonies, I guess is what we would be called then. What I'd be curious about, Greg, is how certain can he be that the South would not have seceded anyway? You wouldn't have prevented the Civil War. You just would have started it 2 decades or so earlier. And then kind of the next interesting question is, would the British have fought the Civil War to suppress slavery, or might they have at some point decided to reach some sort of accommodation, an extended period of indentured servitude or something like that? Look, you don't know. This is probably one for Harry Turtledove and other folks who really specialize in writing alternate history, but I don't think you can take the abolition of slavery being done with a snap of the fingers as a guarantee. I'll give them the Native Americans. I'll give them that. Although, again, ask the Indians, the Pakistanis, ask a whole bunch of British colonies about how well they were treated by the British colonists. Probably better than, say, the French, the Belgians, the Italians, other colonizing forces. But it was no picnic. I don't think, as he said, I'm not so sure that there would have been that dramatic a different treatment of the Native Americans. But okay, fine. I'll give them that one. I think the most interesting thing is he said, well, then we'd have a parliamentary system, and that would be so much better. I wonder, Greg, you think this guy's been to Italy? I mean, just for perspective, in the course of this podcast, Italy has had 3 governments. They've, this is one of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of multi-party democracies. You always have to bring together these complicated coalitions, and you could argue that each one of the major American political parties represents this just in a different format. The Republican Party has got its kind of Christian right side. It's got its gun owners. It's got its economic free market types. It's got national security voters. And there's a coalition, and you're always pulling. So in a way, just thinking of the factions within each major American party, think of them each being a separate party, and everybody having to kind of coalesce and put together these Frankenstein's monster-style political coalitions to try to govern. Sometimes it works out okay. Sometimes it turns out to be a mess. Italy seems to have the worst luck of it. We're seeing over in Germany the sense that Angela Merkel is having real trouble with her coalition over the immigration issue. I don't know if parliamentary societies are automatically more guaranteed to be more stable. I think a lot of that comes down to culture. My suspicion is that the nice thing about fixed terms is, when the elections are, how long somebody's going to be in power, barring an impeachment or death in office or something like that. And everybody gets ready for it. I don't like this idea of this, floating calendar of elections. And some people love the short election seasons. I kind of feel like, if the choice of president is important enough, it's worth taking more than 3 weeks over something like that. Also, I kind of think you're governing. It's interesting. The Constitution has all kinds of checks and balances and facets in it. They obviously wanted to prevent the tyranny of the majority. I also noticed, though, I think is the evolution of the American system. You do kind of want to leave the president and your head of state free to do something that is unpopular but is the right thing to do. When you're the head of a parliamentary system, the head of state can always get a vote of no confidence. One faction of your ruling majority can suddenly say, that's it, we're out. And all of a sudden you have to have another leader selected, reform your coalition and stuff. So I don't think it's necessarily more stable. Now, if you want to say parliamentary systems have led to more generous social welfare systems over in Europe than we have here, well, this is what the real issue is about. He's not really saying the American Revolution is a mistake. He's saying it's a mistake that we aren't having generous social welfare systems the way the Europeans do. Well, I mean, you can buy a plane ticket, pal. You'll really like it. Go over and enjoy it over there. That's an option for you. It's a little complicated paperwork, but go for it. He says, well, why do you think we're having this? Do you think it's because we have the constitutional system we do? Is it because we don't have a parliamentary system? Or is it because we've had this debate and you guys keep losing it? And that's what it really – every time there's a terrible shooting, well, it's time for a national conversation on guns. We always have this national conversation on guns. You guys don't like it because you lose the argument, right? That's what it really comes down to is his attitude is, well, it can't possibly be that my arguments aren't persuasive enough. It must be a flaw in the entire American system of government.
Well, he admits somewhere in this piece that he wishes we were like Canada. Ties still to the UK, but from a conservative perspective, if you know what's happening north of the border and having Justin Trudeau as your leader, if that's your ideal, I feel sorry for you.
Well, God bless the Canadians. It's a wonderful place. Even easier than going to Europe, pal. We have a big open border with them. You want to enjoy poutine? Go right ahead. It's delicious, but and then you can leave America for those of us who kind of like it the way it is.
Yes, exactly. Yes, the founders knew what they were doing. Jim, good to be back. We should point out that it's not just a special birthday for America this week, but a special birthday for you this week. No matter how old you feel, you're way younger than America. So good. That's good news.
Not the highest bar to clear, Greg, but thank you. At least it's Friday. There's only two good things about having the 4th of July on a Wednesday. The first is that, yes, today felt like a Monday, but the good news is tomorrow is Friday.
Yes.
So it's a 2-day work week.
Exactly.
And the second thing is that means next year, the 4th of July is on a Thursday, and in all likelihood, everybody's going to take my birthday off next year. So enjoy your day off a year from now, America.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And head to lendingclub.com. Don't forget about them, lendingclub.com/martini. And tune in again Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.